let's go ahead and get started this morning. Y'all can go ahead and turn to Exodus chapter 20 as we continue walking through the 10 Commandments. So we live in a culture and a world that places a very low value on life. It's kind of desensitized life in many ways. What do you think has caused that? What are the reasons you think that that we're so desensitized to violence and things like that in our culture?
It's been normalized on TV.
Okay, yeah, it's normal to watch a TV show and see people killed or hurt badly or something like that. Absolutely. Anybody else?
It's like your grandma said, them dang video games.
Hey, I mean, some of those video games are very, very graphic. Any doubt about that? Anybody else?
Unfortunately, it's just become part of our society. It's in the news every day. It's gotten to be the norm.
Yeah. The old joke in the news business is that if it bleeds, it leads. So that idea of, but that's because it's what people watch, you know, and so it's kind of plays on itself, you know. And frankly, far too often, it's not just violence that we have a problem with. It's the way we talk to one another, I think, that leads to a coarsening of our culture. And ultimately what we have is a culture that just doesn't have a lot of respect for life. And so as we continue this discussion of the 10 Commandments today, we're going to get to the one commandment that I bet the vast majority of you have never actually violated, the commandment not to murder anybody. Now, probably wanted to a few times. Okay, all of us have probably violated the Sabbath or taken the Lord's name in vain. You failed to honor your parents. You probably stole a pencil from work. You know, and but very few people have actually killed somebody, and because of that, we tend to think, well, this one's the easy one. You know, this is not something I have to worry about. But what we see as we study what the Bible says, not just here in chapter 20 of Exodus, but throughout the Bible about the value that we ought to be placing on life, says that something is wrong and very broken with our world and our culture right now, okay? So this morning I want us to look first at this sixth commandment, and then I want us to talk about what the ethic behind this commandment is. So if somebody will read verse 13 of Exodus chapter 20 for me.
You shall not murder.
Yeah, really easy, really short. Actually, in the Hebrew, it's only two words. It's not murder. Is the words in the Hebrew, so it's even shorter there. And so before we can understand what this is saying, we need to understand, remember how these commandments are divided up and what their point is. So the first 4 commandments are about properly relating to God. You have no other gods. Don't worship idols, don't create idols, keep the Sabbath, don't take the Lord's name in vain. Then we have these last 6 commands that are about how we treat each other. Last week we talked about honoring our parents. Now this commandment is how we properly honor life. And so as we talk about this today, keep this in mind. Jesus said there are 2 great commandments. What were the 2 great commandments according to Jesus?
Love the Lord. Love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah, love the Lord with all your heart and mind and soul and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, okay? And so if you look at the 10 Commandments, you find that these 10 Commandments are divided up among those 2 things. If we're going to live moral, ethical lives in the world, then it's really about those 2 things, loving God and loving other people, treating other people the way we'd want to be treated. And so one of those is that we honor life. Now, the first thing we have to do is dig in on what this command actually means. Some older translations, like the King James, translate this in a way I'm sure that you all know. What would the King James say here? Thou shalt not kill. Now, that brings it with us an entire set of challenges. What is the problem with translating it, thou shalt not kill?
We kill
Self-defense.
Okay, we have self-defense. What was that?
We kill bugs.
We kill bugs, that's right. So part of it is it morally right for me to kill a person at any time? And second is the subject of killing. This doesn't really dig in deep enough for us to understand exactly what's mean there. Who are we not to kill? Are we not to kill animals? A lot of us are in trouble if killing animals is a problem, from the bugs to the deer, okay? But the other problem is, well, does this outlaw all killing of all humans? If so, what about the death penalty? If so, what about self-defense? If so, what about war? Are any of these things justified at any time? So if this translation is simply "you're not to kill," all of us have a lot of problems to deal with, both morally and personally. We have to explain why the death penalty was allowed and actually mandated in certain circumstances in the Bible itself. We have to understand why God sometimes commanded the nation of Israel to go to war and to kill in the Bible. We'd have to even explain why God could tell people to eat certain animals and not eat other animals in the Old Testament, and then opening up in the New Testament to eating basically any animal. So we've got a lot of issues that we have to deal with if we don't seem, and that it just doesn't seem to be adding up to this blanket commandment that all killing is wrong. So the Hebrew word for kill here is a tricky one, but let me give you a basic definition of it. A murder is maybe not the most precise definition even, but it's close. This word is ratza, and it means when a person decides on their own, for whatever reason, to kill somebody, okay? So what that means is there are reasons that the taking of someone's life would be permissible, okay? And I want to get those out of the way before we can really dig in on what he's condemning here. So what are some of the times that you would think it would be okay, if not, I'm not saying you should, but it would be okay to take someone's life?
Self-defense.
Okay, self-defense. All right, well, we'll come back to that one. Hang on to that one for a minute, but that's definitely something that I think we would see. What else?
Defending someone else.
Okay, defending someone else. Absolutely. All right. What else? What do you think this says about the death penalty? I'm scared to say. Well, that's certainly one of the things we have to deal with, though, right? And then war, I think, is another one. So if you look in Exodus chapter 22, let's walk through some of these. If you look in Exodus chapter 22, you'll see that Moses tells the people of Israel that if a thief breaks in and he's struck and killed, then that person who kills him is not liable for it. So what does that tell us?
Self-defense.
Yeah, self-defense. Now he says if the sun's risen, he will be guilty. In other words, if somebody breaks into your house and steals some stuff and you found out they did it and you go hunt them down and kill them, you're in trouble. But if in that moment you're defending yourself, so there's this basic right to self-defense we see there in the Old Testament. Let's take the death penalty. The Bible, the Old Testament, talks about times when the death penalty is an appropriate response to particularly heinous crimes, including murder and some other things. Actually, we talked about it last week. Failure to honor your parents is one of those things that the death penalty was a proper response to in the Old Testament. So we've got that. Paul re-emphasized that. He said that the king doesn't bear the sword in vain. In other words, that one of the proper uses of the state's power is at times punishment, and some of that would be possibly the death penalty. Okay. Now let me say this: we have seen people. That doesn't mean that every use of the death penalty is a proper use of the death penalty. Even in our nation, we've seen people exonerated on death row in recent years because of DNA evidence and things like that. So that doesn't mean, though it is permissible, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's right in every circumstance. But the Bible makes clear that the death penalty is something that is okay in certain circumstances. What about war? What does this do with, how do we deal with this commandment and go into war? That's not a trick question.
If the cause is justified. Maybe.
Okay, all right. So that we could dig in deep on just war theory and things like that, but we don't have time for that this morning, and y'all probably don't care even if we did. So, but there are some times when war is justified. We see it in the Bible. Multiple times when war happened. Again, just like with the death penalty, that does not mean that every war that any country goes to, or even our country goes to, is justified, but it does mean that it does not necessarily fit under this rubric of not killing and not murdering, okay? And and the same is true, let me say this, let me go back to self-defense for a minute, because the same is true in self-defense. Though you may have the right to kill someone in self-defense, that doesn't mean it's always right to kill someone in self-defense, okay? Keep in mind what Jesus said about turning the other cheek, okay? I would, I say this right now like I'm gonna sound big and bad when I say this, but in my mind, I would rather myself die than somebody who's not saved that's gonna go to hell, and I kill them and they go to hell, I mean, now, in the moment, I'm probably gonna get something to try to take them down, but in my mind, and in my mind, I think that's what I would rather do. Anyway, so what I want you to see though is though there are some exceptions to this rule, there are some exceptions that doesn't mean all killing is always wrong. What this sets us up for is a biblical ethic from Old Testament to New Testament that puts a high premium on life. Okay, and that's what we need to see here, okay? The foundational text for understanding this is Genesis 1:26 and 27. It says, God made a man in his image, male and female. He made them both in his image. So what do you think it means that we are made in the image of God?
Spiritual image.
Okay, there's a spiritual image, okay? What do you mean by that?
We strive to be more like God.
Okay.
So in doing that, we're more like him.
Okay, absolutely. I think that's part of it. What else when you hear that idea of being in the image of God?
I think it means that he's, like a person, not, we look like him, we resemble him physically.
Okay.
And that's just what I've always thought.
Okay. Well, I think there's some ideas of that idea that him being a person and we are a person. So whether and of course, like Jesus, we certainly had physical resemblance, but God is the invisible spiritual God, but he still has characteristics like ours. He still reasons and he thinks, and our reason and our thinking comes from that. He has emotions. So there are a lot of things like that we are like God in that. Think about this for a minute. There are billions of things, both inanimate and living, that God made. Everything you look out at, you say, well, God made that. There's nothing that God didn't make. But there's only one thing that God made in his image. Mankind, man and woman. So I can't tell you exactly what it means to be made in God's image. Possibly some of that is the fact that God's given us dominion over his creation also. We don't know exactly what it means to be made in God's image because the Bible doesn't make it really clear. But here's what we do know. Because each person is made in the image of God, and that person is worthy of respect and honor. Now, that doesn't mean that every person is worthy of the same amount of respect and honor, okay? But it does mean that every person, because they were made in God's image, is worthy of some kind of respect and honor. Can you lose the image of God? I think all of us are cracked images. Okay? None of us are perfect images, but the Bible never speaks of losing the image of God. As a matter of fact, if you go to James, it talks about how we talk to and treat people who are made in the image of God. So it's that idea that we are still made in the image of God in some sense. So every single person you encounter is someone who bears the divine stamp. Okay? They have God's image on them. That is part of who they are. And that means every person you encounter is precious and worthy of respect and honor. And furthermore, every person you encounter is a person for whom Jesus died. Okay? And that means that every single soul that you come in contact with is precious. Every life is precious. No life is worthy of being wasted. And so that's when we talk about this little short command, this is the kinds of things that we are getting into, okay? Every life is worthy of protection because every life is precious. You have not ever met a mortal man. Every person you come in contact with is eternal and is going to live forever in one place or another. Is either going to be a person, if you ran into them 1,000 years from now, would be the most horrible thing you've ever seen, or someone that you would be tempted to worship yourself. They would be so beautiful. That is every single person, okay? And so when we read this command, we have to understand that is what it's getting at. So this means that this is more than simply just about you personally avoiding killing people. It means that we must actively work to protect life everywhere we see it under threat. So where are some of the places that we see life under threat right now?
Street.
Yeah, okay, absolutely. In the streets, we see protesters and rioters right now, and we've seen people killed in that, and just people simply not taking life seriously. Okay, what else?
Unborn.
Yeah, absolutely. Unborn is the greatest place that I think we're seeing this right now. Almost 1 million children were aborted last year, and that's the lowest number in decades, which is something to celebrate, the lowest number of decades. But it was still almost 1 million. Okay, I mean that's incredible. And more than abortion even being illegal, I want abortion to be considered unthinkable. Okay, and so we should be fierce advocates of the lives of unborn children. I just can't emphasize this enough. I'm on the board for the Center for Pregnancy Choices, and we see every week people coming in with crisis pregnancies, and one of their first thoughts is, maybe I can just get rid of this and it all be over, and it's never over. Okay, and so we need to be the kind of people who advocate for those people, those children in the womb, but also those moms who don't know where to go and what to do. Okay, so that's part of it, absolutely. What else? What are some other ways that you think life is under threat right now?
Trafficking, human trafficking.
Yeah, absolutely. We see, and we have no idea of knowing the exact numbers, but there's certainly many people who are being trafficked, sex trafficking. There's modern day slavery going on right now. One of the saddest things that I'm never able to track down and never able to confirm was a story that we were working on once, that there was slave trafficking going on at a hotel in Meridian. People who were working, and we knew it, we just couldn't get it. We couldn't get it nailed down, but it's happening everywhere. Okay, and we have to be people who advocate for life in every single instance. We need to be people who are advocating for life. Absolutely. Anybody else?
I think spiritual lives are in danger right now.
Yeah, I mean, the reason physical lives are in danger is because there's so many spiritual lives that are in danger.
Absolutely.
Every, like I said, every person you come in contact with is someone who is going to live forever, one place or another, someone for whom Jesus died. And we need to take that seriously. Okay? We need to be advocates for physical life and advocates for spiritual life, and that's why we go out and we share the gospel with people. Very good. Anybody else? All right, I want to take this a little bit further. Let me add this. This includes people who the world doesn't see as worthy of advocacy. So I'm talking about children in the womb, but I'm talking about prisoners in prison too, okay? Sometimes we think, well, you've done something wrong and therefore you don't deserve respect anymore. You don't deserve to be protected anymore. But when someone in jail dies, that's a tragedy too, especially if they die without Jesus, okay? And so we need to be advocates for the most vulnerable, but we also need to be advocates for people who maybe you don't consider very vulnerable, okay? Because all of us are vulnerable in some sense, because all of us are going to die one day, and so we ought to be advocates for all of that, okay? All right, anybody want to add anything else before we move on?
Just going on the abortion thing, not get political or anything, but you have a, I'm not saying majority, but you have a good amount of this country that are so upset about a Supreme Court justice to be conservative that they're going to overturn Roe versus Wade and all this stuff. And I'm like, if that is your main concern about this, where are we at as a nation? Where are you at your heart? If you worry about abortion that bad.
Yeah. And this is why, guys, we have to advocate for this, but we have to do the work of convincing people. One of the issues I see is that we just fight with each other. Yeah. We don't try to convince each other of our side. We just want to fight. We want to own each other rather than actually discuss and try to change minds on this. I don't care, and I desperately want to see abortion illegal. Okay, but I don't care if it's illegal or not. People are still going to find themselves in crisis pregnancies and desire to have abortions and figure out ways to do it unless we can start changing people's minds. It needs to be more than illegal. It needs to be unthinkable. It needs to be something when somebody is pregnant and they're in a crisis, they say, well, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I know what I'm not going to do. And that ought to be the ethic that every single person in the world has. Just like something like slavery 200 years ago just seemed like the natural order of things. And how could anybody think any differently? And a large percentage of our country, including Christians, probably a majority of Christians, certainly the vast majority of Christians in the South, saw that as just the right thing. It was the natural order of things. And people think the same thing about abortion now. And what that tells you is that it can change, minds can be changed. And it's not elections that are going to change minds, it's believers going out, sharing the gospel, sharing the truth of God's word. Those are the ways that minds are going to be changed. People weren't convinced that slavery was wrong because different people got elected. They were convinced, the vast majority of people who were convinced that slavery was wrong, the vast majority of people who were convinced something like segregation was wrong, was convinced because they were shown in the Bible where it was wrong. Okay.
Yeah, and the Bible speaks about more ways to being enslaved other than physically.
Yeah.
You can be, if you have debt, you're enslaved.
Slave to the lender, that's right. That's right.
The Bible speaks on that.
And so the Bible speaks to all these things, and we need to be willing to do the work of convincing people. Okay? All right. Anybody want to add anything to that before we move on?
I think with crisis pregnancies, we need to advocate against abortion, but we also need to be willing to be a support system for these people after this baby is born. I think if adoptions were easier, it would be a whole different ballgame. So,
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, quality of life or sanctity of life is not just the baby in the womb. It's after this baby is born, what are its living conditions and what can we do about that?
Yeah. One of the things that we do at Crisis Pregnancy Center, Center for Pregnancy Choices now, they kept the same initials but just came up with a different name for it. And I say we. I vote a couple of times, like six times a year. I don't want to pretend that I'm in the middle of the front lines of this, but one of the things Center for Pregnancy Choices do is takes pregnant mothers and tries to help them get educated about being a new mom and about financial stuff. And so there are things that are being done, but we have to continue to support those kinds of things. So our church does that. Our church is giving. But maybe there's somebody in here who says, I want to do more than give. I want to be a part of this, and there are ways you can. And if you're interested, let me know, and I'll hook you up.
And the number of foster children, even in our city, is unbelievable.
Until we find a way to teach parents how to be parents, we're going to continue to have those issues. We'll always have those issues in a broken world, but we certainly, as believers, ought to be able to make those issues better as we shine light in the world. Okay? Anybody else?
As long as we have sin in the world, we're going to have ramifications.
That's right.
And sex before marriage is so we can't ever expect that to go away as long as there's sin. There's always going to be sin in the
That's
world.
right. That's right. But we can by taking the gospel to the world, we can make a difference. We can actually make a difference. And when we get to the next commandment, we'll be talking more about the sex things. So y'all just hang on, all right? All right. Let's look at what Jesus had to say about this commandment. If y'all remember in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, I know you've heard this, but I tell you this also. He said that several times, and he took this commandment in particular and didn't turn it on his head, but he said, there's more to this than you understand. So somebody read verses 21 and 22 of Matthew chapter 5. You can just read it from there if you want to.
You have heard that it was said, those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire.
Okay, so Jesus takes this command about murder and he expands it. And guess what? Jesus can do that because he was the one who gave the command in the first place, okay? So he can say, this is what was meant behind this original command. He says it's not enough to murder. He calls for an end to anger and to insults. Basically, he says the person who gets angry with his brother or insults his brother is liable to the same kind of eternal judgment than the kind of person who actually kills. Now, that's a hard saying to some.
Yeah.
But it's important to realize what it doesn't mean first, okay? Jesus is not saying that if you're angry with someone or if you insult them that it's exactly the same thing as murder, okay? Trust me, I would much rather you insult me than kill me,
Yeah,
all right?
sure.
I'd rather you be mad at me than put a knife in my back, all right? Also, there are different consequences here on earth for the two. You'll go to jail, maybe get a needle in your arm if you kill somebody. If you call me a name, maybe I just get my feelings hurt and complain about it to Crystal. Probably, that's what I do, okay? And she tells me to get over it, all right? That's basically all that happens in that situation. And it was the same way in Jesus' day. That's what made what he said here so radical and shocking. So what do you think Jesus means by this then?
I think it's kind of a slippery slope type deal that if you start, harboring hate towards a loss of respect towards your neighbor or whoever, that it, could lead, that's where it starts at. I mean, you just don't decide, hey, I'm gonna go kill Wade. I mean, it's usually some harboring there before it gets to that point.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I like that slippery slope issue. The heart that issues forth name calling and anger is the same kind of heart that kills someone. It's a difference in degree,
You're right.
not in kind. It's the same kind of heart. So this kind of anger, this kind of name calling is kind of a canary in a coal mine. Do y'all know what I mean by that? So in the coal mines, they would bring a canary in, hang them from the ceiling, and if the canary died, they knew that there was too much pollution in the mine, and they all needed to get out. And so this kind of anger is the same way. It's a canary in a coal mine. It's a warning shot that if you're dealing with this, that this is something's not right with your heart, and things could go even further. How many of you have not killed somebody just because you didn't want to go to jail or get caught? I mean, that's basically what prevents it sometimes. Okay, so when God calls us to value all life, it's really easy to think about those lives that are vulnerable, those lives of people we love, those people who are easy to love. So when you hear, you shouldn't murder, it's easy to think, yeah, we shouldn't murder unborn babies, and we shouldn't, okay? It's very clear. I shouldn't do these bad things, and we should work hard to protect the vulnerable. But Jesus is going further here. He is saying that the lives of people who are not easy to love are valuable too. He's saying the lives of people whom we are tempted to insult and denigrate and be angry with are also lives of value. When you insult someone, when you stay angry with someone or a group of people, you are violating the spirit of what it means to honor life. Okay? You cannot say that you truly value life if you are constantly angry with everybody and insulting people and groups of people just because you don't like them. Okay? Jesus is saying what God meant when he wrote that commandment, you shall not murder, don't murder, when he wrote that commandment, is that we are to honor and value life no matter who or no matter what. And we're to honor and value those people because they are made in the image of God. And we're to honor and value those people whether or not they honor and value us or not. We're to show them respect whether they respect us or not. We are to love them whether they love us or not. And Jesus went further than this when he just said straight up, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. So the people we're most tempted to insult and be angry with, those are the people that we are called to value and love. And I'm going to tell you something. Jesus had to say this because we would have never come up with this on our own, okay? It's easy to think I should love my parents. It's easy to think I should love my kids, love the people who love me. But we would have never come up with this idea of loving our enemies on our own, all right? Of valuing those who we get angry with on our own. And so this is supernatural and the kind of thing that truly only believers can fully do, okay? Now, unfortunately, this is not what I see from far too many believers today. What do we see instead?
Judgment and kind of stuff.
I know, like from personal experience, I need to get off Twitter.
I mean, literally, my profile says I love, like, the first thing on my profile, I was like, I need to come up with something snazzy for my profile. It says I love Jesus, guitars, and jujitsu or something like that.
And
I mean, I had this long thing typed out by this guy, and I'm like, I'm fixing to send it. He's kidding me, you know what I mean? Then I was like, I think God was like, what's your first thing on your profile? So what's gonna happen? I write this, and they're gonna be like, let me go to this profile. I'm like, no,
That's right.
no wonder, you know? So I just had to delete it, and I was like, Lord, I'm not gonna do it.
Absolutely.
Get off Twitter.
Social media has made this, it's so easy to connect with people that you don't like. You know? And because you won't ever come face to face with them, it's even easier to say whatever you want to them.
It's called being a keyboard warrior.
That's right. That's right. It's easy to do it, and there are no real consequences to it, other than the mark that it leaves on your soul.
Yeah.
That's right.
You know, that guy's not going to come find me. He's on the other side of the world, other side of the country. He's not going to. We might argue for a minute, but that's the end of it. But the mark that it leaves on your soul is the problem. And that's what we have to guard against. I want you to look at these two things that Jesus said here. This first thing he says is everyone who's angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to counsel. Now, your translation may use an actual word here. That word is raka, who calls his brother raka. That is basically calling somebody, back then it would have been an insult along the lines of, you idiot. Okay? That's what it'd be. And then the second one is whoever says you fool. That is a decent translation, but it doesn't give us the fullest extent of the meaning of the word here. The word is like not just a fool as somebody who's crazy or dumb, but who's actually evil. You know, there's a moral quality to this idea of fool. So basically, he's saying if you call anybody an idiot, or you call anybody evil, if you call anybody if you insult their morality, not saying that you're wrong here, but saying that you're actually evil. Doesn't that pretty much cover 3/4 of social media?
Absolutely.
That's exactly the thing that he's calling here. I don't just disagree with you. I think that you are an awful person who deserves to die. I mean, that's 2/3 of social media comments when it comes to talking about a lot of the stuff in our culture. And Jesus is saying these kinds of things do not respect life. We say we are pro-life until someone comes along that we don't really care for, and then we act like their life doesn't matter, okay? Until we see people as more than just the sum of their sins and their political opinions, we're always going to do this. Until we see them as people who Jesus died for, people who may be enemies now, but don't have to be enemies forever. You know, did y'all know the church is made up of 100% former enemies of God? 100%. And so God takes his enemies and makes them his friends, and that's what he calls us to do either. So this is about more than simply not killing anyone. God calls us to value every single life, the young and the old, the babies and the people on their deathbed, the black and the white, the Democrat and the Republican and the Klansman and the Marxist. He calls us to value their lives. If Christians started acting like every life was precious, including the lives of those who they most disagree with, we could turn the world upside down. But instead we fall into the trap of doing exactly like the world does. Peter told the churches that we should keep a clean conscience. In other words, live your lives the way Jesus has called you to do, and that men might revile us as evildoers. So you say, well, if I start living like this, it's not going to make any difference. The world's still going to say I'm crazy and I'm evil, and they might. But he says, so that men might revile us as evildoers, eventually they see our good deeds and glorify God. So you're not going to change every mind, but you'll change some minds if you'll live out the Christian life, and that's what it means to value life. Nothing more, nothing less. Anybody want to add anything to that?
Just go get off Twitter.
Crystal and I watched. Crystal and I were watching coaching sound bites, like playoffs, and you play to win the game. Herm Edwards last night. The one we didn't watch was one of his other ones, and it's this: don't hit send. That's a good policy. Don't hit send. We need to guard against that, okay? So what I want you to think about this morning is about how you see the lives of other people. Do you see every life as something that is valuable and worthy of protection? Are you particularly concerned about those lives that are under threat, those vulnerable lives, the baby in the womb? The chances that I'm going to be killed are much lower than the chances that a baby in the womb is going to be killed. But also, the chances that I'm going to be killed are much less likely than my black friend, for a variety of reasons, okay? If you're concerned about these things, then what are you doing about them? Are you praying? Are you advocating? Are you trying to turn down the temperature in the room? I mean, everything is so hot right now. Are you trying to bring down the temperature and make sure people understand that this sixth commandment is about more than just not murdering someone? It's about seeing that every life is made in the image of God and is worthy of respect because of that, okay? All right, anybody want to add anything else?
I think it was a good lesson. You know, myself, I see, you know, I can get over, you know, when people say something on Facebook to you that's mean or whatever, yeah, you can overlook that, hey, well, you know, it ain't worth it. But, you know, like this week, there was a guy that did something to the community out there, and it's like, you know, you find yourself thinking, man, if I roll up on this guy, I'd like to have a little time with him. And, you know, and it's like, but, you know, hey, like you said, that's an image of, he was made in the image of God
And
too.
listen, we also, though we must recognize that each person is made in the image of God, we also recognize that sin is evil and awful
it is.
and has terrible consequences, and it should make us angry. Okay, but we have to balance both those ideas. Just because the sin of someone has made me angry does not mean that they're not still made in the image of God and cannot be redeemed.
Right.
You know,
We also got to understand that we all sin differently and we all fail God differently.
that's right. That's right. No doubt. And though sin should make us angry, we should never allow someone else's sin to make us feel self-righteous. And
Amen.
we can do that too.
Right.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? It's a good discussion this morning. All right, let's close out in prayer before we go into our private time. Michael, you want to close us out this morning?
I thank you for this message this morning, and thank you for everyone gathered here today, and thank you for Wade for bringing our lesson to us this morning. Just pray that, God, that you'll use this to look inside of us and see how we can apply this to our daily lives, Lord, and we can all do better. I pray that we can just take your word and just focus inward, Lord, and help us to be kinder to those we come in contact with, and look beyond their shortcomings to value them more. God, I just thank you for everything you do for us. Pray that you continue to bless each and every one of us, and we just thank you in your name. Amen.